story, and so does everything, antique, vintage, or curio. Artifacts are designed to intrigue. Was it held dear by a family across generations, or was it picked up along the way? What drove its creation?
There you are.
What made its current keeper take notice?
I agree for something.
Watch as curiosity breathes new life into forgotten treasures on The Past and the Curious. Today on The Past and the Curious, a couple of renowned ceramists scored interest for a collector. A significant pattern outfits a cultural history, and curiosity is born with the preserved specimen. Sandy
No, I was interested in that just because it's weird and odd and fun thing to do. This fetus just fits right in nice to my man cave and the oddities that I have.
The term wet specimen refers to any organic material permanently preserved in fluid. The practice began in the 17th century with Frederick Ruysch, a Dutch botanist and anatomist who wanted to delay biological degradation and capitalize on opportunities to dissect, examine, and learn. His experiments were successful and widely applied to the preservation of fetal animals, human organs, and even entire corpses. The groundbreaking methods, which would later include an injectable technique, meant treated items could now be maintained and displayed for centuries. Wet specimen preservation continues to be used educationally in university laboratories, museums, and scientific demonstrations, but also at home as more and more hobbyists open themselves up to the wonderful world of weird.
Weird. That's Steven.
Steve, thank you so much for coming today, and thank you for bringing this fabulous oddity. Can you tell me about where it came from?
Well, it originally comes from a little town outside Tatamagouche, and there was a farmer there that raised bison. It all just started with a phone call from a friend. He invited me to go help harvest the buffalo. And when we harvested the buffalo, the baby came out, and I didn't want to throw it away, so brought it in a bag and brought it home, started doing research on how I could preserve it.
So you wouldn't have known that it was a pregnant
No.
at the time, and so that's how you ended up with this lovely little darling.
Yeah.
So Steve, what was the appeal of making this creation?
I just kind of like weird, odd things that not a lot of people have, and I thought Bison Fetus would fit well in my man cave and draw some attention.
Absolutely, I definitely think that qualifies as weird thing in man cave.
Yeah. And then when I was taking the mama's head home, I want to skin that and have a buffalo skull. And so while I was undressing the skull, I managed to keep the mama's eyeball just so she could keep her eye on her baby and they could be together.
We could be together. She always makes sure that he's behaving himself.
She's looking out for him.
In my experience, taxidermied animals have actually become quite popular, and I think people like a conversation piece. So for Steve, he enjoys it in his man cave. He has this bison fetus. People come in, they ask questions. He can kind of, gross them out a little bit, and he can have a conversation around it. Personally, I have an alligator head that I call Alistair, and he's, and he kind of tucks into corners. You don't see him right away, but he's always there. And so I think people like having little oddities around their home, in their collections that just kind of set it apart from another one. So Steve, can you tell me your process? How did you get this bison fetus in there, and how have you preserved it?
Well, actually, I didn't really know anything about how to preserve it until I had it home. And then, of course, like everybody else, you go on YouTube and you research a little bit about it. And I found out that methyl hydrate will preserve them.
The part where Steve is self-taught on how he preserved this bison is really interesting. He used methyl hydrate to preserve it, and he used an osmosis system. The bison isn't actually injected with anything. It's just sitting in that jar with these chemicals, and it just preserved over time. And the part where he just kind of taught himself how to do it, used a little bit of YouTube, I mean, that's how I figured out how to caulk my bathtub. And instead, he used it to figure out how to preserve a bison fetus. There's no clouding, there's nothing where none of the skin is chafing off. Like, it's in really excellent condition.
Yeah, it preserves it really well.
Yeah, you did a great job.
Thank you.
Other modern ways of preserving, beyond the method you used, would be preserving in alcohol. Formaldehyde, of course, is very well known and very common in the embalming process. There's also glycerin, mineral oils, acids, and glycols. Embalming has actually been taking place since about 2000 BC. It's believed that it started in Peru, in the Chile area in South America. And of course, we're quite familiar with embalming when it comes to the Egyptians, of course, mummification. This type of embalming, these kind of jar, fetus, and other materials, it wouldn't just be a fetus, it could be other animals, that type of thing, it really started in the 1600s with a gentleman named Frederick Rausch. And he was trying to find ways to preserve cadavers. What this really did is it opened up the possibility in museums, in schools, for people to be able to look at an object for a very extended period of time. Wet specimens like this can last hundreds of years, and it could teach students over and over and over again the same specimen. And looking at yours and the fabulous quality and the condition that it's in 10 years later, I'm going to guess yours is also going to last 100 years.
I hope so.
Rausch spent decades perfecting his formula. It was always an alcohol-based formula, and over time, with many different tests, he ended up with what was called liquor balsamicum, and that was really the formula that he used. And what's really interesting about it is that the formula was not actually kind of revealed until 2006, which is quite a funny difference in time, the early 1600s to 2006. This guy's formula was really kept a secret.
Wow.
Rausch actually had a large museum of his own of different specimens that he had created, and eventually it was actually all sold to the Russians. He sold it all to Peter the Great.
Wow.
So nowadays, there's lots of ways to preserve. Of course, there's, photography helps preserve an image, there's taxidermy, and there's even, 3D modeling. But for a very long time, there was no way to do that. You'd have a fetus, you'd have a specimen, and it was only as good to you for as long as it was in front of you. And until this method of preservation came along, that was, of course, a very short period of time. So this type of specimen is still found in museums today. I personally had them in my high school science lab. We had a few on the shelf. I was lucky enough as a child to actually visit the Smithsonian and the Museum of Natural History in New York City, where they have large shelves filled with wet specimens. Specimens like this are also very important to when we're looking at how have animals died out? Are they going to be extinct? Are they endangered? And so they are a very important piece of history because they allow us to look back on those animals. So these specimens aren't just important to collectors like you, Steve. They're important to the scientific world.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Steve, thank you so much for bringing this unique piece in today.
Oh, thanks, Rebecca. It's been fun.
So in terms of value, something like this, it is a niche market that people would be interested in. But I think given just the quality of the specimen, given the fact that it's a bison fetus, how often can people get access to something like this to create it? To me, that would put the value of this piece around, I'd say about $200.
Wow. Okay, I'll take that.
Yeah.
Can you give me an idea of what you'd like to do with it moving forward?
Oh, it's going to go back home, be put up on my shelf, and be admired by a lot more people.
So I have to ask, has anyone been freaked out when they come into your home, or have most people been okay with it?
Absolutely freaked out.
Yeah.
I can see you take pleasure in that.
Oh yeah, for sure. My bison won't go nowhere. He'll be with me for a while yet.
Yeah.
Coming up next on The Past and the Curious.